Hello, I'm going to give a speech for simultaneous, and the subject of my speech is language, but particularly language in humans and how it differs from communication in general. I'm going to look at communication in animals, and I'm also going to compare language as it's believed to have existed in Neanderthals and in modern humans. Okay, so that was my introduction. Now I'll begin the speech. It's often said that language is the defining characteristic of the human species. It's largely what differentiates us from animals. But then you might think, well, don't animals communicate as well? Now it's true, animals do communicate, but the communication in animals is not really language, because it's a series of noises that are used to communicate only immediate needs. Now I'll give some examples. A dog will growl when it's angry or frightened to communicate its feelings, to communicate aggression or fear. It's an immediate need it's expressing. Or for example, certain grazing animals will make a noise to warn the others that a lion is approaching. It's to express an immediate need. Let's get out of here, danger. Or birds will sing to attract a mate. It's because they want to find a mate now. And this is true even of our closest living ancestor, the chimpanzee. Chimpanzee can only communicate to express immediate needs. Now, the chimpanzee is an interesting case because chimpanzees have actually been taught language. Language in the sense of words from human languages. They've learnt the names of objects, of simple verbs, so they are able to construct with little cards, and they are able to understand basic sentences in English, for example. However, no chimpanzee has ever used language to express anything other than immediate needs. I'll give an example of what chimpanzees couldn't say. A chimpanzee couldn't talk about something abstract, such as why I like bananas. A chimpanzee would not be able to explain something like that. A chimpanzee also wouldn't be able to talk about the past. So it wouldn't be able to tell somebody about the time it went looking for bananas and it found a banana and it ate it. It wouldn't be able to talk about the past. A chimpanzee also couldn't plan for the future. A chimpanzee couldn't say, talk about a plan to steal some bananas and talk about how he was going to do it. No, a chimpanzee would just be able to say something like, I want a banana, give me a banana, an immediate need. Now, let's take a step closer to modern human beings and consider a Neanderthal man. Now, what do we know about the Neanderthals in terms of language? Well, it's very difficult to talk about the language capabilities of a species that is now extinct. One thing we can say is that it's likely that they didn't have a very sophisticated language because of the physiology of the throat that was different, and we know that they probably wouldn't have been able to produce as many sounds as modern humans. However, we do know from certain fossil evidence that they must have had a fairly complex language, and I'll explain why. The Neanderthals performed burial rites. That is, when members of the tribe died, they would bury them alongside stones and flowers, and you don't bury people in a ritualistic sort of way unless you have some kind of belief system. Unless you believe that there's another life or there has to be some kind of belief system. Now, if you have a belief system, you have to talk about it. It can't arise without people discussing it with each other. And to discuss a belief system, you have to have a relatively complex language. You can't have some kind of belief in the afterlife if you can only express immediate needs. However, there is some evidence that Neanderthals didn't have the same complexity in their language as Homo sapiens. Now, as you probably know, Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthal coexisted for many thousands of years. But we see certain differences between them, and I'm going to explain one difference. Alongside the bones of Neanderthals, they have found the bones of many different animals. That's normal because they are the animals that they had hunted. But what we see with the Neanderthals is that the bones that are around them are the bones of every conceivable animal, large and small. So squirrels, rabbits, pigs, deer, absolutely everything. A random collection of animals. So what this suggested is that the Neanderthals just went out and just hunted whatever they could find. Now, in the case of our ancestors, the Homo sapiens, at the same time as the Neanderthals, we found something quite different. Next to the bones of our ancestors, we found the bones of animals, but only of large animals. Animals that had more meat, that were a better catch, and that were more difficult to hunt. So it seemed that our ancestors really had to make an effort to get something better. They really needed to try. Now, what has this got to do with language? Well, I'll explain now. If our ancestors really needed to go to that extra effort to get a large deer or a mammoth, they had to plan it carefully. They would have to talk about it. So, a plan between two Homo sapiens would have sounded something like this. Today, let's go and hunt some deer, some large deer. What we're going to do is, you're going to take some large sticks and you're going to frighten them out of the woods. These deer are then going to run towards us, and we're going to be standing by the river, and we're going to kill them with large spears as they run towards us. That's an example of a kind of strategy they would need to discuss, because you can't just catch deer without planning it. Whereas the Neanderthal, because it just went out and caught everything, would probably just say, I'm hungry, let's hunt. Much simpler. Now, when did Homo sapiens really develop a complex language? It's difficult to say, but there are certain clues. Because as I've been explaining, language is used in human beings to express complicated things. And the more complicated the things that we need to discuss, the more complicated our language has to be. So, we know that Homo sapiens had a very complex language when it started doing very complex things. And I can give one example of something very complex. About 40 or 50,000 years ago, our ancestors started going on very long sea voyages, such as when they traveled across the Pacific or went to Australia. Now, if you're going to go on a long sea voyage, you have to have a pretty good language, because you have to talk about what you're going to do. The plans are quite complex. You have to make decisions, so you'd have to talk about what food you're going to take, what water you're going to take, how you're going to transport it. You're going to have to talk about the crew, a certain division of labor, who's going to do what. You have to talk about how to build the boat. You have to talk about how you're going to navigate. And then, of course, you're going to talk about why you're going across the sea, about the plans that you have, why it's a good idea. A sea voyage is something very, very complex, and therefore it requires a complex language. So we know that about 50,000 years ago, they would have had to have pretty much as complex a language as we have nowadays. Now, we don't know exactly how and when language developed, but one thing we can say is that language is fundamental to us. It defines us as a species. And everything complex and meaningful and creative that we've done as human beings is based on language. Thank you.